Welcome to Channel Sales Insight, the podcast designed for CROs, channel chiefs, CMOs, and other IT executive leaders, as well as owner operators of the IT solution provider community. My name is Terry Richardson, and I'll continue to host each of these sessions on behalf of Sales Community. I'm particularly excited about the session this month because it really combines two of my passions: the pursuit of customer delight, number one, along with the focus on scaling revenues through the channel. And today's podcast is one that combines both of those. I'm excited about our guest. I'd like to welcome Erik Vogel, somebody that I've recently become reacquainted with and have spent time with over the past couple of years. And he's going to talk about the journey from customer experience to revenue intelligence. As far as I know, Erik and his company are the only ones that are really talking about this topic in this way. So we have a unique opportunity to present this to a very broad audience. Erik serves as CEO and a founder of VistaXM. And in the spirit of full disclosure, I've been working closely with Erik and the company as an advisor. So Erik, welcome to the podcast. Love you to begin just by sharing a little bit about your background and experience and an overview of the great company that you're leading.
Fantastic. Thank you, Terry. And super excited to be part of this podcast today. My background, probably not dissimilar to most people on here, is tech. Spent a decade at the old Hewlett Packard, the old Mark Hurd days. Spent a number of years at Cisco, jumped over to HPE for a number of years. While I was at HPE, helped build GreenLake, which a lot of you are probably familiar with. Helped build, more importantly, the customer experience program for GreenLake on top of a platform called Qualtrics. So Qualtrics is the leading SaaS platform for customer experience. About 5 years ago, Qualtrics recruited me to run the high-tech and telco vertical for Qualtrics. So I jumped over to the software space and got to work with a lot of the leading brands, a lot of leading tech companies with their CX work. And so, ServiceNow, for example, Adobe, Autodesk, IBM Global Services were customers of mine. I got to help them set their strategy and set up their programs on top of the Qualtrics platform. And while I was doing that, one thing that really jumped out was while the big enterprises do a great job of delivering customer experience programs on top of Qualtrics, other firms weren't getting the same type of benefit. And so a lot of it came down to not having the technical chops, not having the data science chops that they needed, or the process and playbook. So we started VistaXM essentially to solve that problem. We became essentially a managed service provider, providing CX as a service to customers who couldn't do it themselves or chose not to do it themselves. And over the course of the last couple of years, as we've been engaging with customers, we've started to solve some really interesting problems that are really channel specific type problems. And when I say channel, we call it indirect go-to-market. So anytime you've got an OEM, you've got somebody in the middle, and that can be a reseller, a disti, a VAR, a service,
whatever. Yep.
Anybody. It could be a broker. Anybody in the middle between the OEM and the end customer. There is a gap. There is a significant gap because the OEM struggles to understand the experience that partner is delivering to the end customer. A lot of times, in our work, we find that partners don't want the OEM talking to their customer. And so while it's the OEM brand on the line, it's the OEM brand on the box, and ultimately the OEM is held accountable, there's a lack of visibility there, and there's a gap. And a long time ago, I wrote an article for CRN where I called it the partner shadow, where that partner essentially casts a bit of a shadow in terms of understanding that experience that is being delivered. And likewise, when we talk to the channel partners themselves, we were finding that everybody was trying to get that feedback about their end customer, but everybody did it differently. Same problem we saw, that they didn't have the resources and skill sets. So everybody was doing it differently. Everybody had their own process. They made things up. They created their own ad hoc processes. And that created another problem, which was if everybody's doing it differently, there's no benchmark. There's no way to benchmark. You get a number. Everybody loves the NPS scores. Throw out an NPS score of 70. Was that good or bad? I don't know, right? It depends on the process and the method you put behind it. So another problem we were able to address, because we do it consistently exactly the same way, is now we've been able to create a set of really usable and actionable benchmarks across a number of different variables and metrics that are specific to the channel. And that now gives a channel partner the ability to say, hey, how am I doing in my sales experience? Or what's my renewal process look like? And how do I compare to my peers and my competitors? And so we're able now to provide, those types of benchmarks that are really useful because they're standardized and they're consistent, the true apples to apples comparison. So that's kind of probably a long-winded introduction, Terry, probably more than you were looking for. But, I just wanted to kind of talk a little bit about sort of how we started and sort of how we have really started to address some really unique problems within the channel. One is that, again, from the partner to the end customer, and then at the OEM level to the partner. And there's a lot more we can talk about as we go on today, Terry, but hopefully that gives everybody a good idea of sort of the work that we're doing.
Great. Well, let's dig in. I'm going to kind of probably break this section up into a series of kind of related questions, if we can start there. But I'd like to begin with, the title of the podcast was the shift from customer experience to revenue intelligence, right? And on this podcast, most CROs or sales leaders have some form of CSAT measurement that's already in place. Mm-hmm. It might be helpful to share the difference between, what perhaps people are doing today and what you mean when you say revenue intelligence, because on the surface, there's a lot of confusion about terminology and what's what, but I know in your mind, they're very different. So why don't we start there?
Yeah, and probably, three big definitions I'll start with. One is customer success. I think we're all familiar with customer success. A lot of times, and even when I was at HPE, we kind of got all of this mixed together. You've got customer success, you've got customer experience, and then ultimately what we'll talk about is revenue intelligence. So customer success, I think we all are familiar with that. It deals a lot with renewals, keeping existing customers happy, usually kicks in right after we've got a customer and we're maintaining that customer, supporting that customer all through that life cycle of having that customer, and then ultimately getting that renewal or that refresh or what comes at the end. Yeah. Customer experience differs in that we're really thinking about the end-to-end experience. What I mean by that is every time that customer touches your brand. So that can be from the very first time they hear of your brand at an event or marketing outreach, to the sales experience, to the procurement experience. And once they've purchased, to the onboarding experience. How was that onboarding? Obviously into the support side, and then ultimately the renewal. So everybody's familiar with this concept of NPS. We love to throw that number around. And what that really means for us is you're basically asking a customer, think of all those interactions you've had with our brand over the last year, if you do it once a year. So the sales experience, supports experience, all of that together collectively. And would you recommend us to a friend? And in the B2B context, that basically means, are we delivering against our brand promise based on all of those collective experiences? That's what an NPS score is. So as we think about customer experience, that's what we're measuring, and that's kind of what we're gathering. Now, the problem is, and anybody who has run customer experience programs knows this, that's really not good enough, right? It's nice to say, yeah, I've got an NPS score of 70 or 90 or 40 and hang it on the wall and say, okay, we got a vanity metric here. That's great. But it doesn't impact revenue. We have a line we like to use that nobody spends NPS points. So what good is a 70 or an 80 or a 20? Who cares? So what we have done is we've advanced that and moved beyond that, because in reality, I think CX has been around 23 years now since Richardson launched it at Bain. And it was really built more for a B2C construct versus a B2B construct. So you ask everybody the same question and you get a bunch of results back and you dump it into a bucket and say, okay, our NPS score is this. Well, if you're a decision maker and you're answering that versus a day-to-day user versus an architect, a solution architect versus a seller versus all these different roles, you may get all sorts of different numbers. Well, do they all mean the same? Do they mean something different? And that's sort of the inherent flaw with NPS in our, in the B2B realm. And then again, you put a channel partner in the mix and it sort of all starts to break down. So what we have done is we think about revenue intelligence more from how do we think about that at a persona level? So for technology, it's really about, your executive decision maker or your buyer who makes the final decision. And then a set of influencers. So procurement teams, which are really driving a lot of buying decisions. the procurement team influencer. We've got the architect or designer who's ever designing with that solution at the customer level. What do they think? And then ultimately the day-to-day user. So what do they think about it? Because you're going to get very different responses. And we also break it out by journey stage. So thinking about the sales experience, the onboarding experience, et cetera, the renewal experience, because all of those personas experience that very differently. You can't go ask a day-to-day user, how was the sales experience? Well, how the hell do I know? I didn't buy it, right? Somebody bought it and they dumped it on me. That's the way it is. Just like you're not going to go ask the buyer, how's the day-to-day support?
That's the surest way for someone to click off the survey and just be done with it, right?
I don't know, right? I don't touch that thing. I bought it last year, and they take me to dinner once a quarter at a QBR. Sounds like it's okay, right? So once you start to break it out by persona, by journey stage, now you can get some really interesting insights at those intersection points. So if you've got a sales problem, for example, sales experience problem, is it at the procurement level? Is it at the decision maker level? Maybe procurement thinks you're hard to do business with, but the decision maker loves you, for example. Or if you've got a support problem, is it a technical level? Is it a day-to-day user problem? So you can now start to get these insights. And where it gets really interesting and where we're seeing a lot of the value now is being able to translate that back to revenue. And when I say revenue, what I'm really talking about is how do you use it to influence revenue decisions? And every day-to-day decisions that you are making, where you're investing. Are you deploying pre-sale support? Are you enhancing your customer success function and then making bigger investments in success because you've got a problem with renewals? And so you can now use this data, and not just an NPS score, but you can actually use data to make better business decisions that are driving revenue. And I'll just end with one specific example. In the CX world, you might get a CX leader might come back and say, hey, our NPS score dropped 4 points. Okay, that's okay, that's interesting, but it doesn't help you make a decision. With revenue intelligence, we could come back and say, hey, you've got a problem with your corporate accounts in your Midwest region because of the quote turnaround time. And so we're seeing a set of customers who are very unhappy because of the quote turnaround time. And if you don't address that problem, you are going to put 15% of your renewal revenue at risk next year. Right, very different decision data than our NPS score dropped 4 points and we've got to go fix something. Or do we?
Yeah. So what you described, I think, really is differentiated, right? Because I know you've been in conversations with some of the largest OEMs on the planet with, voice of customer experience teams, over 100 to, kind of small regional providers. And as a former customer, I know it was a scramble sometimes just to get the right contacts to send a survey to. And sometimes it might have been one contact, right? But there was no rhyme or reason. But the fact that you can look deeply into specific personas that matter across the journey stages, I don't know that anyone else is doing that, or I certainly haven't come across anybody.
Yeah, I would definitely say it's new, it's innovative. And again, coming from my background in Qualtrics, right, I'm very familiar with the platform and what it can do. And what we've done is we've taken the science of CX, right, the proven science, the data science behind it, the methodology, the technologies, and now we are taking it to the next level. So almost think of it as like CX 2.0. And you're right, as far as we know, we're the only ones approaching it this way. And so again, it really boiled out of the fact that we just see a lot of people calculating NPS scores, hanging on the wall, and that's it, right? And it's kind of nice, but it doesn't help make a smart revenue decision. And so our focus has been, how do we take that and enhance it and give the business something to make a revenue decision with? And that revenue intelligence, that's the value. And so, we work with some of these big partners, just helping them identify, 5 customers at risk. I mean, that pays for this 100 times over, right? If they just saved one customer from churning out because we were able to identify it with this process and method. Or we find, it's not uncommon, putting it in CX speak, you've got your promoters, which are the customers who love you. You've got your passives, they're the ones who kind of like you. And then you've got the detractors, the ones that hate you. And typically, in just on averages in the data we see, it's about 80% love you, 15% kind of like you, and 5% hate you, right? That's usually the breakdown. But the interesting revenue side of this is, on average, the ones who love you spend 7 times more with you than the ones who just kind of like you. And the ones who kind of like you spend 3 times more with you than the ones who hate you. And so just knowing that little insight, the question becomes, well, how do I get the ones who just kind of like me to love me? Because if I can do that, if I can just shift a couple of them into the love me camp, they're going to spend more, on average, 7 times more. I just need one of them to love me more, and I can bring that up. So, with revenue intelligence, we can now provide the insights to say, here's why they only like you and not love you. And here are the top things, and not a list of 1,000 things. That's been another problem with CX where, hey, here's 1,000 insights, go work on them. No, here are the 1 or 2 or 3 things that are going to most significantly move the needle. And if you do these things and improve in these areas, then 40% of those passives are going to become promoters, and you can expect them to start spending more like every other promoter. And the data supports this every single time, every time we do this. So that's the big difference, right? Again, NPS score is nice. But when I can point to customers and say, hey, if you do these things, you're going to get a group of these customers who kind of like you to now love you. And when they start to love you, we know they're going to spend more, and we can quantify that. And we can then drive that. Here's additional revenue that you can get from this type of data.
And just to make sure everyone understands, you do all of this as a service, from the approach to data gathering, all the analytics on the data, and then gleaning the insights that are relevant to pass on. It's kind of start to finish.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, and back to my opening, right? That's what we started on, right? We were an as a service company providing CX as a service, but now we really are providing revenue intelligence using all of that science. So we have our own data scientists, we have our own Qualtrics experts, we have our own survey writing experts, we have all of those people and those skill sets. Plus, look, I'll admit it, I sort of plagiarized, if you will, some of the playbooks from these leading companies. And you know who they are, right? The AWS, the Apples of the world, right? Who really have dialed this in. I had a front row seat while I was at Qualtrics because those were all my customers. So I kind of got to see what they did. So we built a playbook based on those industry leaders. So the way we execute and operate these, you think about the collective experience that we have basically been able to bring together across the leading tech companies in the world, and providing that leading process and playbook. And yes, Terry, we do that. We bring that as just part of the service.
Great. I'm going to switch gears a little bit. You made a reference to workflow-enabled intelligence.
Right.
And it's how you're describing how the data gets used. How does revenue intelligence actually change the day-to-day decisions that a sales team or a sales leader can make, as opposed to what my experience was? At some point, you get the results of, the semi-annual NPS, you got to read out, and then it sits on the shelf. So that's obviously very different, but I think it'd be helpful to understand more about workflow and embedded intelligence.
Yeah, it might be a good time to talk a little bit about, sort of the OEM work we do because this is a really good example. So, we talk a lot about, the end customer and sort of how the partner can help, can learn more about the end customer and do a better job delivering to the end customer. We also do work with OEMs where they want to know, tell me about my partner ecosystem, right? I want to understand my partner, my channel. And so a lot of these OEMs that we work with, they have a lot of partner advisory boards. They have a lot of, these partner groups that they bring together. And it's interesting when we ask about the composition of those, it's usually their top 100, top 200, and it's usually the CEO or the president that's coming to the 3-day offsite, right, with the steak dinners and the golf event and all that fun stuff. And so we always ask, well, look, you've got, some of these OEMs have 50, 60, 70,000 partners globally. What about the other 6,000, 60,000, right, that you're not talking to? And so the thinking is, well, we're learning enough from the big partners that we're really understanding. And that's rarely the case, right? And so one of the things we're able to do is, again, running this same type of strategy playbook is we can go listen to those partners and not just talk to the practice manager or the president or the CEO, but where the rubber hits the road. What about the sellers? What about the architects in that partner organization? What about the day-to-day support people who support that? And so when we start doing that type of listening, we get a whole bunch of really interesting revenue-related signals. So instead of just understanding, hey, is this partner, we call it, how convicted that partner is, right? What's the partner conviction? Are they fully in on that OEM? Or if there's a competitive situation, are they going to position a different OEM? right? If we're head to head, battling for laptop business, and if I'm HP and I want them to position my stuff, and they're like, you know what, we're going to go Lenovo because it's easier for us to sell. That's a deal HP lost. In fact, that's a deal doesn't usually even show up in their win-loss report because they didn't even have a seat at the table. That's just lost revenue. So we can start to measure things like active recommendation rate. So how likely is that partner to recommend that OEM by default? Or are they going to default to a competitor, right? And so again, you talk to the president of the company, we're all in, right? We're all in on HP because there's a commercial relationship. Of course, that's what they're going to say. But when we start doing the listening, because we're a neutral third party and we can aggregate and anonymize that data, they tell us things they don't tell the OEM directly. And so we pick up on those signals. So we can understand things like, again, active recommendation rate, partner advocacy index, right? Are they really being your advocate or not? What's the conviction gap between the practice manager who says, we're all in on HP versus the guy who's selling it every day who said, you know what, that Lenovo spiff gives me a half a point more. I'm putting Lenovo in first, right? Because and we see a huge gap in that conviction between the day-to-day users. And this is a signal that OEMs struggle to pick up because one, you can't ask those people, right? They can't ask directly and they're not going to get that signal. So back to your question, Terry, when we do that work, let's say we get an active recommendation rate score for the partners and we can say, by partner tiering. Well, that data now is starting to influence decisions around how do we allocate MDF. Yeah. Right? Always difficult, right? Always hard to generate an ROI, but we want to allocate it towards those partners that are actively recommending us every single time with a high recommendation rate. If you think about field pre-sale support, for example, right? Where do we allocate those limited resources? At which partner level? Those are decisions you make every day. Tiering decisions, right? How are you going to tier advance different partners? Are you going to move them up or down, right? Those are decisions you make every day. Now you have, instead of just looking at sales data, right? Oh, well, they grew 5% this year. That's great. Well, how much business did you not get from them? How much never even showed up? Or, alternatively, are they building long-term customers for us? Or is this just one of those seller went in, sold something, and next year we're going to fight, tooth and nail to try to get that business again? Again, those are decisions now that you can make with a new set of data points, a new set of intelligence that traditionally just hasn't existed for those OEMs. So when we talk about revenue, embedded type of intelligence, right, where we're embedding within those workflows, MDF allocations, resource decisions, even selecting partners for big deals, right? If you're an OEM and you've got a big deal coming up, hey, who is my best partner who delivers the best in the server side or the AI side or whatever it is? You now can see, hey, this partner knocks it out of the park, right? And so that's the partner we want to bring in on this deal. So our seller is going to work with that. And if you don't think that's important, I love the Jay McBain data from this, right? 67% now of transactions are flowing through partners, but 96% of every transaction is partner surrounded. So you've got to make those decisions with this type of intelligence. There's just too much business flowing there that you've got to have that level of visibility that today you don't.
What you just said was, and I hope you can appreciate how impactful that was as a former channel chief, right? Traditionally, channel programs are designed around building competency, right? And it is required training in order to get the benefits and all that. And you get a lot of data, deal reg and, performance trends and things like that. But what I always wanted to know, but I could never measure, was how committed or how convicted is that partner? Like, what are they doing when we're not engaged directly with them and paying attention? And the ability to solve that is massive for channel chiefs and tech companies. So I think that's one you want to, I hope people are paying attention and listening and taking notes, because that's a biggie.
Yeah. And Terry, it's interesting that gap, right? And so we look a lot at that gap between the decision maker, or let's say practice leader at the OEM, the partner side, and from partner to end customer, that gap between the decision maker and the influencer, because that has a lot of ramifications, right? And we're collecting a lot of data today in the channel. So we probably have the best data set right now. We've got the only set of benchmarks for the channel. Again, apples to apples comparison. And it's interesting, if you're a partner, right, and you're providing your set of services, if that gap is large between the influencer and the decision maker, you're going to have a harder time selling services.
Yeah.
Right. The service game becomes much harder because, selling product is fine. You can sell to that buyer and they buy it and it's a once a year thing and you're gone. But services, that's an ongoing relationship you have with the technical teams, right? With the day-to-day teams. And that influencer gap, if they don't like you, you're going to have a much harder time selling services into that. And we've got the data that, hey, those firms, those partners where that gap is small, do a much better job of service attach. Right. And the service business, and every partner we talk to right now is trying to improve their services business. Right. It's still 80-20 by and large, 80% hardware and units, Terry, right? 20% services. Everybody wants to flip the ratio. Yeah. Who's excelling, right? Who's doing well are the ones who have a smaller gap, right? Yeah. So revenue intelligence, right? How big is that gap? Why do we need to close that gap? And what do we have to do? And we can do the same thing. We see the same correlation at the partner to, or the OEM to partner. Where there's a gap between the practice leaders and the frontline employees, right? Actually out selling the stuff right in front of the customer every day. And so the reasons why are really pretty interesting. It's technical confidence, right? Does the partner, like I said, part of the enablement, do they have the technical confidence? Do they have the competitive knowledge they need to position HP over Lenovo, for example? Do they have the trust, right? The program trust in the product, in the solution? Do they have business case clarity? A lot of times it's amazing that, we hear this comment a lot. I don't know how to position it from a business case perspective. I know the technology is better, but we don't have a good solid business case. I'm going to default to, the OEM I know better. And so that just takes an OEM right out of the equation, even though it's a registered partner, it's a platinum partner, a gold partner, whatever, you now just lost an opportunity. And so being able to understand that signal and say, hey, we got a problem with technical confidence. Okay, I'm going to take an action. I can go help those gold partners and we can go spend some money. We're going to invest some time in enablement and improve that technical confidence in our certification process, in our training process. We're going to double down. We're going to enhance that because that's creating a gap. And where we see that gap between practice leader and frontline, we're seeing, the share of spend goes down, the upsell goes down, the renewal rates are lower because that gap exists. So what do you close that gap? It raises everything. And those OEMs who've sorted that out are outperforming, right? The ones who haven't are underperforming. And the data is very clear. We've got the data.
I talk to a lot of CROs and, not surprisingly, they're feeling more and more pressure to drive as much recurring revenue as possible and to, broaden the amount of business that gets transacted with any given customer. Mm-hmm. So kind of specifically, how can VistaXM help CROs, accomplish, those key objectives?
Yeah. And, I probably will just say, look, this isn't necessarily a VistaXM thing. Just in general, look, you've got to have that ear to the customer. You've got to understand the friction points, and just having them come to a customer advisory board, and having the sales leaders come in, or the practice lead, or let's say customer leaders come meet your sales leaders. That's usually not good enough. We call that the Sun Valley effect, and it's because we had a customer once that they every year they would cherry pick their 20 best customers. They take them to Sun Valley, Idaho for a 5-day retreat. Go horseback riding, golfing, fly fishing, shotgun shooting, all the fun stuff. And, the response, and they take very accurate notes about what customers were saying, and big surprise, right? Customers love them. And, the CEO would come back and say, our customers love us. Look, I just spent 5 days with these guys and I never heard a negative comment. Well, when you go talk to the customer, they're like, well, of course, that's what we're going to say. We want to invite back next year.
Exactly.
It's the best boondoggle we've got, right? It's a lot of fun. We love going up there. We're not going to say anything negative. And so, but that's not uncommon, right? When you do a customer advisory board or you're doing customer listening. So what's really important is you've got to listen across your entire customer base. Small customers matter too, not just your big customers. And you've got to listen to multiple personas within that customer organization, because just because a decision maker loves you does not mean the influencers do. And eventually those influencers are going to get to that decision maker. And we've all had those experiences. Every CRO on the call has had that, where this customer's green. They love us. They bought us. All of a sudden, they disappear.
That's what the account team said. That's what the CRM said, right? Everything's great.
That's right. Everything was great. They love us, and then they disappear, or we don't get a piece of business that we deserved, that we should have won. Why did we not get that piece of business? We call that the blindside churn, and all of a sudden they just disappear. And the reason why is ultimately those influencers have gotten to that decision maker, and then a new decision gets made. And to me, that's, if I were in a CRO position, that'd be what I'm most afraid of. At least if you have some insight. And so one of the things that a good listening program will do for you, from revenue intelligence, is it gives you the early visibility. It gives you the heads up well in advance that there could be a problem. And because we see the gap in the influencer to decision maker, we start to pick up on signals from, hey, the support team really upset, right? They're really angry. And so we'll see that data in the support stage of that customer journey. We can pick that up, and then we can take an action on that, right? Customer success can get involved. We can go close that, because if you don't, then that becomes a blindside churn and that customer just disappears, or you're not getting the business you should be getting, right? You're in the they like us category, and you're getting 1/7 of the business that they love you category gives you. And so, why do they only like you? Because your support stinks, or because you're too slow to turn around a quote, or your redlining process is too cumbersome. And, Terry, we obviously worked at HPE together, and that was always the common complaint, right? It was just hard to get deals through. And, being at the early stage of GreenLake, boy, that was a nightmare, right? It was, half a year wasn't uncommon, right, to get a deal put together, and customers complained about that. And while you're arguing about, trying to get a deal done, they're talking to AWS, they're going to Google Cloud, and they're like, we'll just go public cloud. We don't need the GreenLake private cloud. So you got to have that ability to listen across those personas, understand those intersection points, and translate that to the revenue decisions. And say, yes, if we don't fix this, and we have to, because it's putting X dollars at risk, or we're going to have bigger churn, or we're going to have flat sales, or whatever the consequence will be. But again, whether it's VistaXM doing it for you, you do it yourself, to me, it doesn't matter. But that's what you've got to do. That's the new science. That's kind of CX 2.0, if you want to think of it that way. But take that listening capability, extend it, look at it by persona, by journey, understand those intersection points, translate that to business decisions you make every single day. You'll make much smarter allocation decisions, investment decisions, those types of things with that data that will ultimately lift the business. And look, we work with great partners, great companies who do it really well, and we see the benefits, record quarters, massive revenue quarters. And we see the opposite, customers who are like, we're struggling, we're flat, we can't get the growth. And everybody's growing right now, right? The AI business is huge for everybody. You're getting your share of that. We work with some partners who are getting more than their share, their outside share, and that means somebody else is getting less. And the common characteristic is, who's making the smart decisions, right? Who's investing wisely, working with the right, at the right level, with the right customer, at the right time, all of that, because they've got revenue intelligence that enables them to do that.
I wish I could be a fly on the wall on some of the readouts that you give back to your customers, because I'm sure there's things that you're telling them that probably catch them by surprise, but still surprise in a good way, because now they can take action because they know.
Yeah, that's really interesting, Terry. A lot of times when we come back, customers will say, we knew that, or we kind of intuitively thought that. But a lot of times they just didn't have the data to support it. And so just having sort of an intuition or a gut feel usually doesn't get past an investment committee, right, to go do something, or we need to hire some success people. Well, prove it, right? And now with this type of data, we can actually put the numbers behind it, right? We can quantify what that looks like and actually give that, that CRO or that COO or who's ever, responsible for this, the data that says, yes, we need to do this. We need to go hire these 10 success people because our renewal process is a mess. And if we don't fix this, we're going to put more dollars at risk. And so, just hiring these 10 people will save millions of dollars of renewal for us. We can actually quantify that. But a lot of times, like I said, well, yeah, there are always those insights, those aha moments where, well, we did not know that. And we call those the $1 million insights, because any one of them is worth millions. Everybody on this call, the scale that we operate at, a fraction of a % of improvement is worth millions. I mean, that's just the reality, right? And so one little insight that, hey, your spiff program, like from an OEM level, some of these sellers are defaulting to Lenovo because they make a point more on the spiff. I didn't know that. Go fix our spiff program. Give them 2 points more, right? And all of a sudden it closes that gap. We pick up a handful of more deals that all of a sudden it pays for this whole thing 100 times, 1,000 times over. So we can provide those types of insights. And then sometimes, like I said, people kind of intuitively know. There's a bit of a gut feel, or maybe I heard this from here and there. But when we quantify it, when we show them the data, when we show them customer verbatims, where we talk to this support person in this company, and this is specifically why they don't like you, right? And by the way, here's 20 comments from 20 customers that are almost identical. It's like, okay, now we can take an action here and we'll go fix that. So I would say, yeah, a lot of it is aha moments, but there are also some things where they kind of knew, but now we've quantified it and they realized, yeah, this is a bigger problem than we thought.
You talked about success with some very, very large OEMs, global and national solution providers. What about companies on the other end of the extreme that don't have well-defined voice of customer programs, may not have a customer experience team formalized? It might be part-time from somebody's responsibility to send out the NPS survey once or twice a year. Like, can you help companies like that? And what would that look like?
Yeah, and that's a really good point. And that was a big problem I saw when I was at Qualtrics. Like, everybody wants that. But if you're let's say you're a small solution provider, maybe you have 500 customers, 1,000 customers, limited marketing budget, right, to do this. It's hard. And so what happens is, right, you tap somebody in marketing or somebody in IT, and they'll send a Google survey out to customers. Maybe you get 5% of those customers to respond. Again, poorly worded questions, and you really don't get much, right? And you sit down, maybe you sit in a conference room, order a pizza, and you review all the comments and try to figure out and decipher what's happening. In those cases, I'm not sure you get any value out of that. And that's why, people try that for a year or two, and then they sort of abandon it. So one of the things we've done is we built specifically to address that. And this came from actually an OEM request, which is, look, we got a lot of small partners. They don't need all the bells and whistles. We run a program for some of these large partners today. We bring a Qualtrics license with us. We give them their own dedicated environment. Everything is customized and personalized for them. Every survey that comes out looks like it's coming from their sales rep. We do all of that with the branding, but small partners don't need that. So we have what's called an essentials offer, where we can come in. All we need from the customer is a contact list. Now, that's a whole different topic, right? The hygiene varies across the board. But we have some tools that when they give us the list, we can say, hey, you've got gaps here. You got this one customer where you have 1,800 contacts, and then you have another customer where you don't have any. And so we can look at it by size of customer and say, hey, for your biggest customers, we want to make sure we have at least 4 contacts, so we can work with account teams to get that updated. But once we have that contact list, we take care of everything else. And so we're able to go out and we're able to pulse all of those contacts, get all of that data, do the analysis like we talked about, give them the insights, but more importantly, we give them the benchmarks too. So they can see, okay, based on the industry, we're in the reseller industry, and here are the benchmarks for what a good sales experience should look like, what a good support experience, what a good procurement experience, what a good onboarding experience. And this is executive confidence or decision maker confidence. This is a good score. Here's where we are. Are we in the ballpark? And so we are able to provide those types of benchmarks, and of course the NPS and the CSAT. One of the other things we do is we provide the only third-party validated NPS score. And so everybody runs, who runs NPS programs like to tout their number. Everybody does it differently. There are firms out there that cherry pick customers who get NPS surveys. 99, 98 is not uncommon in this industry. Is that real? It can't be. Like, statistically, it's almost impossible for that to happen. We were joking with one customer. We're like, why 99 and not 100? Right? If you're going to game the system, game it to 100. I'm like, well, it's more believable if we're 99. But so because we do it with a consistent model, think of it as that JD Power score, where we can now certify and give a third-party validation. So when you're out competing for business, you're seeing this more and more in RFP responses, for example, where people are saying, hey, I've got an NPS score of 72 and it's third-party validated. This isn't my own that I self-administer, which nobody buys into anymore. Everyone, honestly, it's nice, but it's just fluff at this point. But now we can give you a validated VistaXM score. So that's all part of that essentials offer. And we position that specifically for small, price points very low.
What's the price point?
So the price point is $25,000 to go and do that work. Yeah, and then you get access to the portal. You can see all those benchmarks. You get all the certified score. All of that is included for that $25K. So it's a quick way to get it. I mean, you can't even buy a software license for that if you wanted to try to do it on your own, let alone the time. And everything is done to best practice. And it's all the same playbook as ServiceNow and Adobe. So you're getting a miniaturized, industry-leading program where we come out and we do this on your behalf with all the standard questions. You get all the benchmarks, certified scores, all of that for $25K. It takes about 90 days, start to finish. And all we need, it's a light lift from the companies. It's not like we need a lot of their time. We just need that list of contacts. And if they don't have it, that's also a flag. It amazes me, and this big partners as well. This is not just a little partner thing. Big companies as well. Like, how do you not know who your customer is? What happens if that sales rep leaves? Who do you contact in that customer? You don't have it anywhere. There's no CRM that has that customer contact. So if that rep leaves, they're taking that business with them. And you don't even know who they're talking to. And so that's a flag in and of itself. And one of the ancillary benefits that people see from this program is it forces them to improve the hygiene of their customer contacts, right? They've got to go, they've got to get that fixed. They've got to get it cleaned up. And again, we can provide the tools to say, okay, it's 80% is good, but at least 20% needs some attention. You better get your sales teams on this because you don't have contacts. We've seen $20 million customers a year where they do not have a single contact in their CRM. Like, how do you send them a Christmas card? Right? How does the executive reach out? You've got to work through a sales rep to do that. And what if that sales rep leaves? Who have you been talking to? Probably 20, 30 people you talk to in that account every year. You don't even have it in your CRM, right? That's a hygiene issue. And everybody knows that problem exists. That's a dirty secret. Everybody knows it. Yeah. But those are things we help with as well by default, because you've got to have that cleaned up. And that's, again, part of the essentials package. We help you.
And you can help with ROI kind of calculations. Payback, I assume, has to be rapid. Given what you're talking about, if you just prevent a single churn, or you glean insights that allow you to sell more to someone that was a neutral all of a sudden.
That's right. Yeah, we usually come back with, look, here's your list of at-risk accounts, and we will specify the account. We will tell you why they're at risk, and we will give you a suggested plan to say, hey, you need to do these things, or here's your passive accounts. And here's why they're passive. And we provided they respond, we know who they are by name, and we can say, here's why they're passive. Here's what you need to do. And if you do this, you can expect a bigger share of wallet and a bigger spend. And you're right. We save one customer from churning out. We identify one customer. Every time we run one of these, there's always a list where people are shocked. Yeah. We did this once where, a customer awarded this particular partner of the year 3 years ago. This year they were a detractor. And that means they're on the way out. And when you reach out to them, they say, thank you for reaching out. We want this to work. We want this to work. Let's work together because we like you as a partner. However, the last few years have been tough. And if we don't get it fixed, we're leaving. Just that one customer pays for this 100 times over, 1,000 times over in some cases, right? So it doesn't take a lot to show an ROI on a program like this. And again, whether you use us or you do it yourself, we're kind of the better, faster, cheaper option. But if you've got programs running and you want to enhance them and improvement, of course you can do that. Yeah. But the value is, because this really touches on big customers and helping you retain customers, the ROI on these types of programs is massive as long as they're tied to the revenue. Just going and getting an NPS score has no ROI, zero. So if you're running a program to get an NPS score, you're kind of wasting your time here. You've got to run these programs with an idea that, yes, we're going to retain customers, we're going to expand customers, we're going to take the ones that hate us, and at least we're going to keep them neutral. We're not going to let them churn out. We're going to prevent some of that lost revenue from churning. And the ones who are in the middle, we're going to get a percentage of them to love us more because we know they will pay us more. And again, the industry, the data we see across partner after partner after partner, it's about 7-to-1. Industry average is 3 to 4 to 1 across broadly, but within this space, right, specifically within IT and within the channel, it's 7.5, almost 8 to 1 in some cases, in terms of the amount that customers who love you will spend with you on average versus the ones who just kind of like you. And, it really comes down to, if they love you, they're going to consolidate spend. They're going to give you all the business, right? They're not going to partner X for Cisco and another partner for HPE. they're going to let you sell everything. And that's the difference. And understanding why and being able just to move 1 or 2 customers into that love you camp, huge ROI on this business.
I'm not going to ask you to name names, but I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you to describe, a few examples of customer successes before we kind of bring the call to the close. Anything come to mind that you want to share?
Yeah, we've got, working in the SaaS space, we've got a SaaS customer. Big focus in the SaaS world, as everybody knows, is NRR, so retained revenue. And one of the things we saw working with them was the correlation between NPS and NRR. And it was amazing how tightly coupled they were. This was a firm that's been doing this work for a few years. And so we were able to see the trends. So this, like every SaaS firm, the goal is to drive and improve NRR. And so what we were able to do is go in and say, all right, what quick actions could you take that will bring up NRR? So by doing the customer listening, we were able to identify, doing the science behind the data. Hey, here are 2 or 3 things that really matter. We look across, in some cases, 14 different dimensions of that interaction. And sometimes scores can be very low. They may not like your, pick something, right? Your procurement process, but it doesn't really correlate to NPS, right? The overall satisfaction of the customer. They may not like it, but they still like you. They're still going to buy from you. And I always say that, when you look at Apple, people always complain about the price of the new iPhone. No matter what they launch, everyone thinks it's too expensive, and they're going to give you a low score on price. But they will still line up 24 hours in advance at the Apple store and camp out to buy the new phone the day it releases, right? So there's not a tight correlation there between overall satisfaction and that. So with this firm, able to identify some very specific things. They were able to start taking those actions, where the problems were. And we've seen an NR increase from, about a 7-point increase over last year. Now, at scale, a couple $100 million firm, that is, in the tens of millions of top line benefit. And again, this was not trying to do everything. And part of the challenge everybody has is everyone thinks they know what they need to do. Executives will get in a room and they'll have put the Post-it notes on the board and let's whiteboard this out. This firm said, no, we're gonna use customer validated data, and we're going to synthesize the data, do the science, and we're going to narrow that down to 2 or 3 things that really matter, right? That really will impact us. The low-hanging fruit, no regret moves, ease and impact, whatever business buzzword or McKinsey buzzword you want to throw in there, it's fine. But that's the idea, right? Is getting to that prioritized list and then taking actions on that, tracking the value. And the 7-point increase in NRR is massive at a couple $100 million firm. So that's and that's a success for us, right? And again, the ROI on our program is in the tens of thousands because it's just massive, right? When you see that type of benefit.
All right. So last question, 2-parter, if okay. I didn't mean to cut you off. Did you have something else you wanted to say?
I can. Hey Terry, so I'm glad you.
So if a sales leader or CRO is kind of listening to this and thinking, is revenue intelligence something that I should be thinking about? Is it the right investment? Like, what are the 2 or 3 questions they should be asking themselves? And for those that already know that they're intrigued by listening to what you had to say and want to take the next step, what does that look like?
Yeah, I would say, look, if you don't have this type of insight, right? If you can't tell, if you don't know what the influencers in your customers are saying about you, right? Not the decision maker. Everybody knows, we all talk to the executive, right? The decision maker. They come to our golf outings, they do all that stuff. But what about where the rubber hits the road, right? The influencers in an account, what do they think about you, right? Do you know where the friction points are in that customer journey from the very first time they engage with sales to when they're renewing because they've loved you so much? Where is the friction point along that path? And not just across that journey, but within the individual personas, right? Where does that friction occur? Or do you have visibility into that friction? Because that friction is what builds, which ultimately, like we talked about, leads to blindside churn or customers only liking you, not loving you. And also, do you know, do you have a visibility into, if you're a promoter, how much more does a promoter spend with us than a passive or a detractor, right? The loves us versus likes us versus hate us. and what percentage of those detractors churning out, and what percentage do the passives churn out, and do you have visibility into that? Because if you don't, that's the type of data that can help you make smarter decisions when you pick that up. And so I would ask those questions. If you're still doing things based on what you hear from an executive or a decision maker, and you're sort of building your programs around that, or you're only talking to your 20 largest accounts because you take them to Sun Valley every year, you're probably not operating with all of the data you should be operating with, and you're missing some really critical insights. And I have yet to work with an account that didn't have $1 million insight. Right? There always is something like, we didn't know that. If we would have known that last year, we would have saved these 2 accounts. Or if we would have known that, we could have done something differently and we could have reduced churn. And when I did work, we used to find these when I did work with Autodesk, for example, in the software space, right? They did a lot of digital renewals. Why weren't they getting renewals? Well, we found some really key insights in terms of how the software was sold. Like, we would have missed that. If we would have known that, we could have saved this, and they fixed it, and renewal or churn dropped, and they made millions on it, right? So just picking up those key insights. Again, if you don't have visibility to that revenue intelligence, that's I think a good opportunity. In terms of how to gauge, if you want to hear more, look, I'm happy to talk about this all day long. As you can tell, it's something I'm very passionate about. Love this space. We have a tremendous amount of data now. We have great visibility into what's happening. Again, OEM to channel partner down to the end customer. We've got we already have some really valuable insights. If you want to hear more, just reach out to me. I'm Erik, ERIK, at VistaXM.com. You can just come to our website, VistaXM.com. Everybody knows you, Terry, right? Reach out to Terry. Terry will connect us.
I'll get you.
However you want to do that, you can connect with me on LinkedIn. I try to connect with people who are going to attend this in advance. Happy to have a conversation. Again, whether you want to do it yourself or you want more information, I could talk about this all day. Absolutely passionate about it. And I don't think I'd be so excited if I didn't see the value. And it's really fun working with customers where, we're seeing the value that gets created. And so that's really fun for us. And, we think we're onto something. We know we are. We see it all the time. And, this is a real, can be a real competitive advantage for these firms. And, there's a great, and I forget the lady's name from Soft Choice. Soft Choice is a Canadian partner, got acquired, I think, by WWT a few years ago. But, really interesting quote from her that I saw recently, which was, look, we all sell the same shit. We sell all the same stuff from all the same OEMs. The only differentiator is the experience. And, that's what differentiates them, you, from everybody else, is that experience you deliver. And now you have a way to quantify that experience, not just, I talked to that president and he loves us, but are we doing well with the sales teams? Are we doing well with the architects? Are we doing well with the day-to-day support teams? And are they in our camp? Are they helping us? Are they really fully committed to what we're doing? Or do we have work to do? And the more important question is, if we have work to do, what do we need to do, right? Don't give me a list of 1,000 things. Give me 3 things that are going to move the needle. Because if I just bump that needle just a little bit, it's going to generate significant return for me on the backside. And that's the way these programs work.
Yeah. Well, Erik, that's probably a great way to end. I want to thank you for dedicating your time to join the podcast. I appreciate you sharing your experiences, and I really think you provided some really valuable insights to the audience about really what's possible when you think about all the intelligence that can be gleaned from listening more carefully and more precisely to customers and what they have to say. So thanks for being on the podcast, and thanks for making the time.
You bet. Thank you for having me.
All right. So if I just kind of recap the conversation, the journey from customer experience to revenue intelligence, we all know that NPS and CSAT, have always, but can offer even more insights. They never should be vanity metrics. That's just a waste of effort. And the fact that they can be third-party validated, I think, is going to prove to be really, really important going forward. What you talked about allows sellers, CROs to think about ways to get more business from existing clients and help sharpen the focus on new account acquisition, because you're able to really glean what customers most appreciate about the relationship with any given firm. And kind of the final one that I'm passionate about is you've kind of solved an age-old problem, and you've eliminated a key blind spot for companies and channel chiefs related to what's the experience from the customers that are doing business, not directly with the customer, but through indirect third parties. So really, really valuable. Thanks again for the time. The next podcast will be in July. I want to thank everybody for joining this one. I hope you found it as valuable as I did, and appreciate it if you could keep the comments coming. We appreciate the feedback, and until next time, I wish everybody good selling.